Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar entitled Cybersecurity Governance, Latest Trends, Threats and Risks. This is one of a series of Security Matters events organised by Brian Groves and Insurance Technology Forums, which I'm sure some of you have been to before. And I will just open up my slides so you can see the agenda. So we've got three presentations for you today from three of our technology partners. So these are all technologies that North Door work with and sell and implement for our clients. And they're going to go through the various capabilities that they experienced in their field. They're seeing in the market, give some feedback on that and some of the issues and solutions. So my name is Richard Jeffries. I'm Insurance Client Manager at North Door. We have Mark Woolwood, who's CTO and CISO of Viama. Sam Hector, IBM Security Channel Leader, and Gordon Young, Director at Aquilai. The session is going to last up to an hour, so each presentation will be 15 minutes, and there'll be time for questions at the end. So you'll see a submit a question button on your screens. So as you go through, please submit questions, and we'll go through all those at the end, so we'll have time for those. Just a brief word on North Door. Hopefully some of you will know who we are. We've been around the market for a long time and over 30 years now. We're an IT solutions consultancy and we have a core specialism around insurance. That's always been our main industry. Some of you will know us from some of the applications that we provide to the industry around things like policy admin, sanction screening, moving more now into things like automation of some of the core insurance processes around setting up policies, assessing risk and claims, and digital channels to market. Broadly, we focus on data. That's what we call store it, protect it, use it. So that's putting data into the right environment, whether it's on-prem or cloud, putting the right layers of protection around it, and ensuring you can extract meaningful insight and analysis out of that data. And a security portfolio, some of the elements you see listed there below. Top three are going to be part of the presentation today around protections, mapping and protection of applications, looking inside threat and phishing. So all big issues in the security landscape of today, and some of the other areas you'll see below that we cover as well at North Door from a security perspective. So we'll get straight into it, and I'll hand over now to Mark Woolwood from Viama.
Thanks, Richard. Hi, everybody. Yeah, my name's Mark Woolwood, and I'm the CTO and CISO for Viama. Prior to joining Viama, I had 16 years at Goldman Sachs, where I was a technology fellow, and also CTO for networks, telecommunications, and some aspects of security. So this isn't going to be a product pitch, although I will spend 30 seconds on what we do at the end. It's a discussion about taking a new approach to application protection and technology risk management and governance, in particular in the cloud age, because things are changing about how applications are deployed and delivered. I'm going to describe some of the problems we have now in the abstract, with some examples, and then I'm going to talk about a way to think about those problems and address them. And I'll provide an overview of an approach that we've adopted called application relationship management. So before we get going into that, just a little more background. So as part of my role as a technology fellow at Goldman Sachs, I had responsibility for application resilience and risk within the EMEA region. So I've got a deep grounding in things like Basel, the Bank of England requirements, CBEST, FFIEC, and I occasionally worked with the Centre for the Protection of National Infrastructure in the UK on various matters. And I spent a lot of my time working across development teams, identifying resilient application design patterns and building tools to provide insight into fundamentally complex, interconnected, and opaque environments. You know, financial services application environments typically are very, very highly interconnected, using an SOA type of architecture. And what I wish I'd been equipped with at that time was some of the insights and capabilities we're going to discuss today, because a lack of accurate and current knowledge of my environment made it very hard to improve the resilience of the applications and resilience of our business. So one more thing about my experience in these 16 years at Goldman Sachs, and what we hear from our customers all the time, is that financials, including insurance, are institutions of trust. And to quote from Goldman's first business principle, our assets are our people, capital, and reputation. If any of these is ever diminished, the last is the most difficult to restore. So trust is super important, particularly for risk-based businesses like finance and insurance. And this trust can only be maintained by being thoughtful risk managers. In technology terms, that means focusing on operational resilience, which includes cyber resilience. And if you look at the global thought leaders in this space, that includes the Bank of England and the FFIEC in the United States. And in particular for the insurance industry here, it's important to be aware of the PRA's publication on operational resilience, which they updated this year, which applies to insurers and managing agents as systemically critical entities. There are regulatory requirements to develop maturity and capability in this space. So the regulators are now moving away from treating business continuity and cyber recovery as a single recoverable event towards a more continuous process of ensuring resilience and anti-fragility within your systems. So this applies to business risk with things like liquidity and vendor risk management, but equally it applies to technology risk management, which is what we're going to be talking about today. So technology governance is now about achieving resilience and doing so continuously because things are changing so quickly. So the problem with governance is that it can conflict with the modern digital delivery of products and services. You know, governance historically was either based upon a point-in-time review or assessment, which becomes useless over a short period of time when your environment's always changing or your applications are always changing, or it gets in the way of innovation. It inserts friction, which means it is very difficult for your organization to innovate with new products, new technologies, and new deployments. So what we're going to talk about is continuously applied guardrails and assessments using software to provide resilience and to ensure that your governance structures and your technical governance requirements continue to be applied. So when it comes to achieving resilience in complex institutions, it's really all about knowledge, accurate current knowledge, which is actionable. So without accurate knowledge, you can become paralyzed and unable to recover from a situation without the delay associated with understanding your environment and the dependencies and how should this look. And it can also stop you from planning and preparing accurately, from putting policies in place, from applying zero trust policies to protect your critical functions. Knowledge is necessary to enable governance. So in modern
Mark, sorry to jump in, it's Richard.
Yeah.
We're not seeing your slides. Have you got them up?
I forgot to share them. There you go. After all that,
Okay.
Coaching and preparation. I apologize, everybody. Okay, so you got to look at me more than you needed to. All right. So, in modern financial computing environments, we suffer from a surplus of data. Software-defined and cloud-based ecosystems generate events associated with almost any technical interaction or transaction. And our SIMs and our log management systems gorge upon huge volumes of time series data. So one of our medium-sized customers, their private cloud is generating 150,000 log events a second. So there's lots of data here, but it's not usable. It's not knowledge. It's not actionable. So not only have the trees overwhelmed our view of the woods, but they're also moving constantly. So a bit like, Triffids on steroids. The infrastructure is changing, applications are continuously being deployed, and this is being orchestrated by APIs and dynamic control planes in the cloud world. So, example, by the time you look at a CloudTrail log from an EKS pod in AWS, that pod probably has ceased to exist. So that data isn't really valuable anymore. It doesn't have the context that you need. So how do we focus and prioritize? If we can make this raw data more contextual, then we can use the machines and the software to give us the knowledge we need to ensure that the security controls continue to be applied according to our governance and control requirements. So, adding to the problem of volume, the issue that cloud infrastructure and applications, the issue here is that the cloud infrastructure and the applications are changing relatively quickly. API-driven cloud environments and CI/CD pipelines mean that infrastructure and applications change all the time. So if you look at the way we've handled risk management and governance before, the biannual planning and testing associated with business continuity planning from the past is being replaced by the need for a continuous risk assessment and continuous application of controls. And certainly that's been reflected in the stance of the Bank of England and the UK PRA and the FFIEC in the States, which are all viewed as the kind of the global best practice models for other regulators to follow. So if I'm going to quote the FFIEC, which is the federal regulatory body that governs all of the finance institutions in the States, including insurance, resilience is the ability to prepare for and adapt to changing conditions and withstand and recover rapidly from disruptions. Resilience includes the ability to withstand and recover from deliberate attacks, accidents, or naturally occurring threats or incidents. So data that's out of date, that cannot be accurately related to a business function, particularly a critical business function, is not helpful to us in developing operational resilience. So in this session, we're going to quickly explore the differences between data, information, and knowledge, which is known as the DIKW hierarchy in information theory, and how a data-driven approach using graph technology to enrich real-time data sets with structure and business context can allow an organization to continuously manage risk and provide resilience to their business. So proactive governance processes such as the business impact analysis and policy management, they require knowledge, and that knowledge needs to be accurate and current. So knowledge allows you to do things like assess risk proactively, assert controls, and ensure that they're asserted in a frictionless manner that doesn't prevent you from innovating and building new products. So, what is knowledge? So now we're going to get into a little bit of theory. So within information science, the DIKW pyramid, which stands for a hierarchy of information classes going from data to information to knowledge and wisdom, is used to describe the framework within which information exists and can be used. So if you think about where we are today, we have lots of data. All of our different systems, and if our applications are well instrumented, they all produce lots of data. And at the top, we have the wisdom. We have governance requirements and regulatory requirements. But the problem is there's a gap in the middle. And that gap used to be filled by human beings and weeks of time. So if we take like the firewall change request as an example, that would normally go along the lines of a human being asking, what are the systems that make up an application? What do they communicate with? Is this appropriate? Does it conform to the corporate governance and security standards? And then we'd make a decision about how we secured it. But in a cloud self-service world, that human doesn't exist in the process. And if they do, they slow everything down by weeks, and they halt your innovation or your ability to innovate quickly. So now we're going to talk about what we believe is the solution. So how do we turn the data produced by the machines into knowledge? And how do we take the wisdom expressed by the regulators and senior leadership, our governance requirements, to apply that in a highly dynamic and automated world that's driven by APIs, and that human being isn't in the middle? So this is the role of application relationship management, the technology we built to power application security in complex multi-cloud environments. And this diagram gives you an idea of what's involved. So, what does application relationship management do? From the bottom up, first of all, it consumes the data from the machines, from the telemetry produced by your environment, from your APIs, from cloud logs, from CloudTrail logs, from application logs. It consumes that and it manages that kind of volume. The next thing it does as we move to the information layer is it structures it. It describes the behavior and relationship of things. It begins to understand where applications are, where data is, clients accessing it, and how users are behaving. So that's the information layer. As we move to the knowledge layer, it contextualizes this information with metadata. What is this data? What does it do? What's the business function being performed? Which organization owns it? What are the cyber risks involved? And what are my regulatory requirements? So what we're doing is we're layering on context on top of data to make it something that you can work with. And the model that you end up with at this knowledge layer can be addressed by the wisdom or the control requirement as it's normally expressed. So give you an example. PCI, implementing security controls that conform to the PCI DSS standard. What application relationship management does for you is it determines the category of your systems, which systems are in scope from a PCI standpoint. It labels them. It computes the security policies required to meet the DSS requirements. It applies them and it monitors them. So all of that is automated and it doesn't require the human interaction. Next example is a business continuity management example. In that context, application relationship management will identify the scope of your critical business functions. It will identify their interdependencies, compare their recovery time objectives, and that information is often pulled from a GRC or an inventory, and then it will report on violations, and it will do so continuously. So what that means is your requirement to be able to recover a critical business function, which is a governance requirement, is assured by the software within application relationship management, looking at the dependencies and their properties. So it's effectively what we're doing here is we're gathering business context and we're joining it with relationships and then applying the governance requirements down through policies. Super, super powerful. So we've talked about the value of knowledge here. Application relationship management is the technique defined by Gartner to create this knowledge of your application environment in order to enable governance in a modern API-driven world where things change very, very frequently. So if we look at what we have in our toolbox today, in terms of security tools, we have numerous tools, but none of which really facilitate the governance required in dynamic digital environments. So we've got SIMs, and SIMs attempt to manage the fire hose of data produced by IT environments to find a smoking gun. But they're not proactive, and they don't enable you to create policies and guardrails without a lot of manual work. We've got CMDBs. CMDBs allow you to define your intent, but they fail to track the environment and understand actual behaviors and areas where your intent doesn't match reality. We've also got GRC tools. GRC tools allow you to structure your risk and compliance control requirements, but they're unable to map them to your runtime environment, and so they become something that's kind of theoretical and more of a effectively a project management tool. And then finally, application performance management understands relationships, and it can tell you about an application's behavior and performance, but it doesn't react when your dynamic environment changes, and it doesn't understand security controls and governance requirements. So up in the top right-hand corner of this chart, application relationship management continuously monitors your environment. It evaluates the dependencies and relationships, and it ensures that your governance and control requirements continue to be applied, that your recovery time objectives can be met, that regulatory requirements for control are effective, and that your complex hybrid cloud environment remains secure from an application standpoint. So final slide, this is the only slide on what Viarma does. The Viarma application controller provides application relationship management. It allows you to understand your applications and dependencies from a business and risk perspective, ensuring that your dependencies do not represent additional risk from an operational or cyber perspective. It automates the management of zero trust policies, ensuring that your critical assets remain adequately protected. And finally, it ensures that your compliance and risk objectives are continuously met, producing exceptions when violations occur and reporting to business and risk owners as required. So application relationship management addresses IT governance requirements continuously in a world where nothing remains constant. Thanks for your time and thanks for listening. I know that there was a lot there to get out in 15 minutes, so hopefully that was that was interesting for you guys. I'm done now. I think my 15 minutes is over. So what I'd like to do now is introduce, in fact, let me stop sharing first of all. There we go. I'm going to introduce Sam Hector from IBM, who's going to be speaking about insider threats. Over to you, Sam.
Thank you very much, Mark. That was a really interesting presentation, and it's really interesting to see the work you're doing to manage security policies and to manage application security across these kind of diverse environments. Can someone just give me a shout if they can see my slide on the screen correctly?
Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you very much. So, yeah, Mark, thanks very much. And so by way of introduction, I am Sam Hector, and I run the IBM Security Business Partner channel here in the UK and Ireland. And I'd like to thank North Door for inviting me along to talk about the topic of insider threat to the Lloyd's market audience today. And over the next 15 minutes, I'm going to be defining what we mean by an insider threat, what forms these attacks can take, and I'll then give a real world example of lessons learned from a recent high profile attack, and finish on the approaches that insurers can be taking to mitigate the risks that they face against insider threats. So firstly, let's define what an insider threat is. And this is an employee of an organization that either on purpose or unknowingly misuses legitimate access that they have to systems to perform malicious activity. And this area of security is one of the biggest challenges that the industry faces at the moment in terms of how to protect against insider threats. And the reason for this primarily is hidden in the detail of this definition that's up on screen just now. It's the legitimate access bit. And often insiders are simply using legitimate access that they've been granted to sensitive systems to perform malicious activity. Therefore, protecting against it is quite complex, because if you take a technology approach, the technology needs to understand the difference between normal use of a sensitive internal system and malicious use of an internal system, which is where it gets quite complex. And I'll come on to how we're doing that towards the end of the presentation. But before we get ahead of ourselves, let's park that technology angle for a minute, and let's look at the different profiles of people that can act as malicious insiders. Firstly, a lone wolf is one person with the motive and means to perform malicious activity. For example, database and system admins are in a particularly high risk group. And I'll come on to explain later how IBM security solutions can protect privileged users. Two examples of lone wolves would be Edward Snowden, for example. You had the motive and the means to leak classified NSA information while working at the CIA. And secondly, an employee at Sage, the accounting software firm, that in 2018 had an employee steal private customer information, including salary and bank account details. The next profile of an employee that can act as an insider is a collaborator. And this is a malicious insider that's looking to steal intellectual property or data and sell it. A good example of this is from a few years ago. That could be a nation state spy. And we saw the example of Greg Chung, who was a Boeing employee that was sentenced to 15 years in prison for hoarding R&D documents in order to send them back to China so that China could accelerate their space program when Boeing was working on the space shuttle. The next profile is a goof. And goofs aren't malicious, but they are lazy. And often these are privileged users that think they don't need to follow security policy for whatever reason. Just a few weeks ago, I saw an example of the Microsoft Bing search app on mobile phones. The search app had been configured to log all searches with associated metadata to an unsecured cloud server that anyone could pry into. No login was required. That is a goof move. And then finally, we have the pawns. And the pawns are those unfortunate users that fall victim often to spear phishing attacks. And typically, this is where threat actors will impersonate, quite believably, a senior employee within a company with a seemingly urgent request to transfer funds to a criminally owned bank account, for example. Pawns often don't know they've been compromised until it's too late. And that's why it's important to have technology solutions in place that can alert against this. After my presentation, I'm actually going to hand over to Gordon Young, who's going to cover the topic of phishing in much more detail. So please do stick around for Gordon's presentation after mine. But at IBM Security, we see a roughly 50-50 split between those insiders that cause breaches maliciously and those that do it accidentally. But we also know that insiders are responsible for more than 50% of all data breaches. So we've spoken about what the risk is, the different forms that it can take in terms of these 4 profiles of insider threats. Now let's look at an example of it happening very, very recently before finishing on what insurers can do to mitigate the risk. So this summer, in the midst of the coronavirus pandemic, Twitter demonstrated that even large social media firms are not immune to insider threat. And I'm going to summarize and vastly oversimplify this attack for the sake of time. But in summary, a teenager from Florida has been accused of impersonating someone from Twitter's IT department. He allegedly called Twitter employees, some of whom had only been working at Twitter for a week, and tricked them into providing their credentials to access Twitter's internal customer service or admin portal. Once this teenager had access to this internal Twitter admin tool, they were able to go into the accounts of a number of users and change the email address of these high-profile Twitter accounts to a criminally owned email address. This included now President-elect Joe Biden, Barack Obama, Elon Musk, Bill Gates, Apple, Uber, to name a few. And then when they were able to send a password reset email to those accounts by simply attempting to log into them and saying, I've forgotten my password, that password reset email then went to a criminally owned email account. So the criminals could fully compromise these high-profile accounts. Once they had, the attackers sent out tweets from all of these accounts that they'd compromised in a smash and grab attempt to gain as much Bitcoin into their wallet as possible in a short amount of time. And Twitter, after this attack occurred, quite quickly realized what had happened because of this flurry of activity on all of these high-profile accounts, and rushed to withdraw the access that the attackers had managed to gain themselves. Subsequently, arrests were made, and 2 people from Florida and a teenager from Bognor Regis were charged with this Twitter attack. And it's this quote, and it's this kind of time that I'd like to move on to actually how we go about mitigating the risk. And this quote from a Wired article on the Twitter attack this summer quite nicely illustrates the core mistakes that Twitter made here. So it says, ideally, automated systems would have identified which Twitter reps were changing all of those email addresses in such a short amount of time. But a former Twitter security employee says that the company had been slow to invest in that kind of early warning technology, and that a culture of trust had blinkered it to potential internal threats. So that highlights 2 approaches that are core and critical to each organization mitigating their risk from insider threat. And I'm going to come on to the IBM security approach and 3 things that are best practices to mitigate against this risk. The first one, and among the most effective, is educating staff about the threats that are actually out there. Every insurer listening to this webinar should have a plan in place for keeping your employees aware of the techniques that attackers are using. And this education in particular should encourage your staff to have a really healthy dose of skepticism if someone, for example, they've not spoken to before is approaching them, or even if someone they do know, or it appears that someone they do know is approaching them with an unusual request. And that level of skepticism should be doubled if someone attempts to instill a sense of urgency to the request that they're coming to them with. Secondly, one of the most effective ways of preventing this malicious activity is to design your internal policies in such a way that would deter individuals from taking malicious action in the first place. And let's come back to the Twitter example, because had they designed their internal admin tool to require a manager or even another colleague to approve any changes made to a verified account, it would have potentially prevented so many of these verified high-profile accounts from being compromised en masse by having a simple verification check or an approval check required. And for insurers, think about how this might affect your process flow of how an employee would make changes to your most high-profile or most high-value policies. For example, how might you change your process flow to prevent a malicious insider changing critical details or evidence against a claim, critical details on a policy or evidence, so that a fraudulent claim is actually paid out to a collaborator where it shouldn't have been? How might you change your process to prevent that from happening? Finally, the third and final point is to invest in a robust suite of security tools that can actually detect, alert against, and block insider threats. At IBM Security, we've got a number of ways that we can help, and I'm going to tell you about two of them in particular today. But before I do, it would be remiss of me not to highlight that while technology solutions can go a really long way to improving an insurer's risk posture, they are not a silver bullet. And actually, to mitigate the risk of insider threat effectively, it has to be a combination of all three of these approaches that is required. In addition to these three approaches, it needs cross-disciplinary and senior buy-in from the IT team, the security team, HR, legal, risk, procurement, and so on and so forth. With those teams, it's really imperative not only to have buy-in, but to have playbooks in place that give instructions for the steps to take to remediate against a threat when the worst does inevitably happen. And IBM has a number of these playbooks pre-built, and I'd be happy to show you how IBM and North Door combined can help insurers form really watertight incident response strategies. Just reach out to me on LinkedIn, reach out to Richard after this presentation, who's going to be sending out all of the details. So, the first tool I'd really like to tell you about is QRadar User Behavior Analytics. And for those that don't know, QRadar is IBM's security intelligence solution. So that collects security relevant data from across the enterprise, whether this is on-premise data that's within your enterprise or whether it's spread across hybrid multi-cloud environments that we're seeing more and more frequently. QRadar then runs all of these security log events and network traffic through its AI engine to determine the top potential issues your security team needs to look at as a priority. What's more, and what is a key kind of competitive advantage for us, is that free for all of our QRadar customers, we offer this application that's up on screen called User Behavior Analytics. And this app called UBA uses really advanced machine learning algorithms that we've developed specifically for tackling this challenge of insider threat. And this app looks at your the data your employees are generating on a daily basis as they go about their job functions, and forms baselines of what normal behavior looks like for those employees. And typically, coming back to the challenge that I set at the very start of my presentation, this is what we would regard as employees using their legitimate access to sensitive systems appropriately. So it forms a baseline of what's normal. And then it detects when employees are making behavioral changes which step significantly out of line with what they normally do on your internal systems. So user behavior analytics will then assign each user a risk score, which you can see on the right-hand side of the screen. It's the kind of red, yellow, and grey bars there. And users are then ranked according to their perceived risk to the organization, so that the security team can take proactive steps to stop a potential threat, whether malicious or accidental. And furthermore, one of the most common use cases for user behavior analytics is to detect when employees have had their credentials stolen by a threat actor, and someone else is logging in using their legitimate login details, but isn't actually your employee. Another thing that we can do, and a very common use case for this, is to detect when a user has been affected by a malware takeover of their accounts. And in fact, it's not actually a human user that's interacting with systems, it's a malware robot that is attacking your internal systems. We can detect that using user behavior analytics. The final tool I'd like to talk to you about is specific to privileged users in your organization. And these are users with elevated access to sensitive systems, such as IT admins or even customer services reps with access to internal customer portals, like in the Twitter example. And often we speak to clients without a privileged access management solution who find that their IT teams are still sharing the same admin login details to access sensitive internal systems, often in really insecure ways like passworded Excel spreadsheets. And the challenge with this is that when an admin user steps out of line, it's often impossible to tie their actions back to one specific individual in the team, because all of the IT admin teams share the same username and password to these systems. And also, what happens if a disgruntled admin were to leak that spreadsheet? It would take an organization a very long time to manually reset all of those admin credentials and ensure you don't break any integrations in the process. So the way that IBM Security is solving this is using a privileged access management solution called Verified Privilege Vault. And this allows you to detect accounts across the enterprise which have privileged access. It then stores all of these admin credentials in a really highly secure vault, which is of course heavily encrypted and only accessible through two-factor authentication or multi-factor auth. And then each admin user logs into this vault using their own credentials. So you can tie actions back to a specific individual and then selects the internal system they'd like to access. So while they're doing their work in that system, Privilege Vault is recording all of the admin users' activity. And when they're done and they log out, it automatically changes all of the credentials that the admin user used to log into that system, so that if they were able to find out those credentials, no one can reuse them and attack that system. So the credentials are automatically rotated. This means there's an audit trail of what users have performed what actions, and you as an insurer can allow third-party contractors specific and limited access to your internal systems in a really highly secure manner. So thank you very much for your time today. I've given IBM's definition of what an insider threat is. I've showed you what forms it can take with a real-world example, and covered both technology and strategy-based approaches to mitigating the risk of insider threat. So I'm about to hand over to Gordon Young, who will be diving into the topic of phishing prevention. But first, if you found this of interest, please do reach out to myself or North Door to find out what we can be doing to help your organization mitigate the risk of insider threat. So with that, Gordon, thank you ever so much. And I'll pass
Thank you, Sam, and thank you for the nice introduction to phishing. Hopefully I can do it justice. Phishing is something that every entity in the UK, every business entity in the UK suffers from. Once you've been phished, you're on a list and will continue to be phished. And it's really a way for bad actors to try and get your credentials. So phishing's called many things: spear phishing, whale phishing, deep sea. But basically, phishing's all about someone, a bad actor, impersonating one of the folks in your company or your brand. And it is the most common entry point into your networks. And given that the insurance industry has quite a complex ecosystem to support their business, it makes it easier for bad actors to target you and break in. And usually they're after credential theft. Now, I'm going to talk about phishing. Phishing isn't malware or spam. Often they coincide, but phishing is on its own, and it's not going away because it's got a very high return on investment for the phishers. So here's some stats here. Basically, it only takes just over a minute from when a phishing campaign started till the first victim is hooked. And most of these breaches you're reading about in the Financial Times, or if you're really unfortunate, the Daily Mail, they go back to phishing. It might be just a generic phishing campaign. It could be targeted in that it targets your PAs. One of our insurance customers targeted their FD. So they don't make any distinction. They're really after credentials and to try and harvest them and move forward. And it doesn't matter how much money you have, you can be compromised. And once you're compromised once, you're on the list. So there's really two types of companies: those that have been attacked and those that are about to be attacked. And what you'll find is most enterprises, 99% of enterprises, they have some form of email filtering already deployed. But it's clearly not working, because every time you pick up the newspaper, someone else has been phished and compromised. And Gartner has recognized this last September by publishing a cloud email supplement where it says, don't depend on the native defenses included with your applications like Microsoft 365 email. And the NCSC will tell you, look, phishing education, it's useful, it can be useful, but on its own, it's not enough. You should not be depending on your employees to block a hole in your cyber defenses. At 9 o'clock in the morning, if a phishing email gets to me, I have a better chance of recognizing it versus at 5 to 6 in the evening when I'm packing up, I'm rushing home, got things to do in the evening, get the kids to bed. That's when the phishers know that we're weaker and have more opportunity to compromise us. I thought it might be useful to show you a phishing email. I'm sure you've all seen phishing emails, but I thought I'd just break one down and explain a little bit to you. So in this particular one, which our AI has picked up, there's no subject, there's nothing in the content which can immediately give some indicator of compromise. The display name was set to Peter. This is a real phishing email that went to one of our customers. So although we've shown where it really came from, it was the display names. You just looked at it, was obviously from Peter, who's the president and CEO of the company that's been spoofed. This email passed through full DMARC, DKIM, SPF authentication. So in fact, it came from a compromised account. Last year, we saw a lot of phishing activity to build up compromised accounts. And this year, we're seeing a lot of activity from those compromised accounts. And most of these compromised account emails will go straight past your existing defenses. They won't even slow down. This one was a targeted email, so it was targeted to an employee within the organization and addressed her by her first name in a friendly manner. There's no payload, there's no URLs to click, no bad attachments. What we're trying to do, what the phishers are trying to do here is basically get her telephone number and get her confidence and continue the attack. And it's got the familiar, I'm doing something, but oh, I need your help. Can you do this quickly? Please do it quickly because I need whatever it is. So it's written with urgency and familiarity. And it's got the correct signature format. So this passes through all the traditional types of email filters. And this is dangerous. This is quite a sophisticated phishing attack. So if I were taking a step back, what would I like to see in a phishing defense capability? So I'd like to see what the white background here on the left. Input from the government cyber and intelligence agencies. These are the people who know what phishing attacks look like. This is their job. They're expert at it. They've got loads of experience having seen nation-state attacks from Russia, Iran, North Korea, China, etc., attacking our pharmaceutical industry for COVID information, attacking universities for IP, and so on. I'd like to see a solution that I know could protect me, not just today. I want to see it be able to evolve as the phishers start using artificial intelligence in their attacks. How am I going to combat that? So I need to be ensured that anything I've got today can defend me against those future attacks. I'd like it as a cloud service, because on-premise tends to be very difficult to secure, and the likes of Microsoft are putting all the latest features into their cloud emails. So being able to offer it as a subscription where you can easily switch on and integrate with any of the cloud-based emails. Microsoft 365 obviously is the leader. Being able to integrate in there in 30 minutes, whether it's 50 users or 50,000 users, I'd still like to see a 30-minute installation with no disruption. And by no disruption, I mean I don't have to change anything that's already deployed. So if I'm using an email management system, if I'm using Microsoft's native defenses, I don't want to have to change any of that. What I really want is just to switch on this solution and have it work. And I don't want to see any updates. I don't need this. I just want to deploy this and for my IT staff to be able to forget it's deployed and have it be effective, irrespective of the software or the devices I'm using to read my emails. So I might be using an iPad today and some Android device tomorrow. It has to work right across that. And then I want to take a new approach. The existing solutions don't work. I would want to take the defensive solution right down to the user and be able to have a profile of that user generated automatically by AI, so that I can use that to better protect every user in the organization, and also create the threat intelligence in terms of present it to the IT guys. This are the types of attacks your organization and your users are experiencing. And being able to take that down to both the organization and the user is very powerful, because it extends the defense right down to the human. And where we're talking about phishing, the human user is the weakest link. We are the weakest link. I suppose you've heard that before. It always makes me smile when I say that. But a key thing that I'd like to see is something called sentiment analysis. So using linguistic, natural language programming, linguistic analysis to analyze the content of the email and uncover the sentiment, the emotional content, any coercive content in that email. Because if you're just got a few lookups that's alerting you on, oh, this email says password, it says account, those are simple to bypass your defenses. It's very much harder to bypass a solution that's looking for the sentiment, emotional, and coercive content in the content of the email that's arrived in your inbox. And I want to make sure that any solution will learn as attacks change, and also will auto-learn as me, a user. If I'm working first in finance and then I move to HR, I want a solution that actually tracks me and can adjust my profile to the types of emails I'm receiving. And I also want a solution that addresses the weakest link, addresses the human aspect of phishing. The insertion of some coloured banners into emails, that means blue banners would be okay. I can look at that and say, that's cool. It's just an external email or a first-time sender. I'm good with that. I can actually keep going. And then I'd like a solution where, look, there's something about this email. Just slow me down. If I'm going to reply to it, just give me some guidance. I haven't seen, this person hasn't contacted me before. It might have half a dozen URLs that are going all over the place. I really want something to give me some guidance that's looking at the emails just like a cyber expert, but giving me guidance so it's non-disruptive and lets me just see what's happening here. So in this one, you can see it's maybe the non-English email address. This one's okay because it's been neutralized, but it's introducing entropy, so it's slowing me down. So if I get this at 5 to 6 in the evening, I don't want to reply to it right away. And now we've got an email that is phishing. This could be Office 365. Your emails are in quarantine. Click here to release them. And so red means danger. Red is take care here. So NCSC likes these emails when they've been notified clearly as phishing to go through to the end users, because if an end user never sees a phishing email, they don't know what it looks like, but also it can help the IT staff with working with the user to understand where it came from. And that can be quite useful. It might come from, you've used your corporate email address for Sainsbury's online shopping and Sainsbury's get compromised. It could be something as simple as that. But other companies don't want phishing emails to go through to end users. And in that case, the solution has to be flexible enough that they go to quarantine for user release or for admin release. Now, I also want to see, these banners are lovely, but when you touch on them, I want to see a completely dynamic display of why that particular email has been branded as phishing, with a little threatometer that rotates round in real time, giving me the primary reason why it's a phishing email, and give me some information on it, just to let me see it. And I can either confirm it's phish, or I can say, no, it's been misclassified, and we can change it. And being able to scroll down and see every item that has been shown to result in this being a phishing email. The typical solution that Aquilai has, we're going to give you something like 25,000 indicators of compromise per email. But we simplify that down for the user. So we present this information in plain English so that the user can see where it's come from and give them some hints as to why they might be receiving this particular phishing email. And we also want to provide user organizations with a little bit more granular control. So if a user clicks on a link from a potentially dangerous email, the organization, we give them the choice. Well, the blue button to continue can be there if you're quite cool with your employees being able to do that, or the blue button can be missing. Just a little bit more of granular control on your employees. And I would want a solution such as ours that doesn't cause me any degradation in my GDPR compliance. I don't want emails stored. I don't want any third party to be able to look at them. The only thing I want to be able to look at the emails are the automated software classifiers that determine whether it's phishing or whether it's suspicious or it's okay. And nothing should be stored or kept. And the only information that our type of solution keeps is the to, from, and timestamp fields. And the reason we keep this information is so that if you click on one of the banners up to 30 days, we can give you the full analysis of that email. If you click on it over 30 days, you don't get the analysis. It's been overwritten. And to conclude here, no company is safe. You cannot rely on education. It's useful, but do not rely on education. Put something, whether it be our solution or something else, in place, and that can help you determine what your employees are receiving. And I'd say that automation with artificial intelligence is a very good next step as a circle of defence. And we've got a quote here from Peter at Meridian Risk. They've deployed Ajax our solution, and they find it very effective and easy. And I'm sure Peter would be happy to talk to any interested parties. And if you're interested to have a free of charge trial, bear in mind it takes 30 minutes to deploy and there's no disruption, then please speak with your North Door representative. So I'm now going to hand over to Richard to take you through some Q&A.
Thanks, Gordon. And thanks, Sam. Thanks, Mark. Presentations, good insight on the topic, and good insight into some of the ways you're going to address it with in technology, and also people and processes and ways of working, data and knowledge. So I hope that's insightful for the audience as well. So a couple of questions come through we can address now. People want to submit more, that's fine, we have a bit of time. So first one, for Gordon, while you're still in the hot seat, when you're talking to organizations, how often do they feel they're adequately protected against email phishing attacks?
It can be quite interesting when we speak with folks because they've deployed Microsoft, they might have solutions like Mimecast with advanced threat, and you'll find that they're well protected for spam and malware. But then when we dig into the detail, you'll normally find that phishing emails are leaking through to their end users and causing concern and issues, and using the resources in their IT security teams to try and mediate the impact. So yeah, it's an issue, and we're finding that there is no company in the UK that is exempt from that. And our close work with GCHQ and NCSC put us in a good position to help UK enterprise finance and insurance to stop these attacks and safeguard their assets and employees.
Yeah, sure, okay. Thank you for that. One for Mark. Can you give an example of the type of governance statements this approach allows you to apply and how?
Oh, okay. All right. Let's go with a couple of examples. One I did refer to kind of briefly, which is a governance requirement will be that my systemically critical functions can be recovered in less than an hour. They have a recovery time capability of less than an hour. So that's not quite as straightforward as it might seem, because what you have to do is evaluate what your function consists of, what its interdependencies are, how they relate to each other, and what the capabilities are of each of the links in the chain. So that's the kind of thing where application relationship management pieces together relationships and context about different systems and can answer that question. One other related a kind of a related question you might ask, or this is a very, very common requirement that we see, is that any software vulnerability risks that would impact my critical business functions need to be mitigated in less than a day, or let's say material software vulnerability risks. So what that means is you've got to take the output from your Qualys scanners and your vulnerability scanners and relate that to how your applications connect to each other, because otherwise Qualys will give you, or your vulnerability scanner will give you this fire hose of events when a new vulnerability is found. It won't tell you which of the systems you should prioritize. So once again, application relationship management kind of gives you that context. I hope that's clear.
Yes, thank you for that. That's great. And so that concludes the questions. We're just at the top of the hour, so I'd like to thank the audience for attending. I hope you found it very useful today and insightful. I'll be sending out a copy of the slides to everyone who attended. And as I said, there's the offer of the free trial proof of concept for the technology we talked about today. So if you want to talk about anything further, take up the offer of the access, then you can reply to me and we'll be in touch and we can talk about that. So that concludes today's webinar. Thank you, everyone, and have a good day.
Thank you. Thanks, guys.